Lieutenant General Sir John Bagot Glubb, KCB, CMG, DSOOBE, MC, known as Glubb Pasha, was a British soldier, scholar and author, who led and trained Transjordan's Arab Legion between 1939 and 1956 as its commanding general. During the First World War, he served in France. Born in Preston, Lancashire, and educated at Cheltenham College, Glubb gained a commission in the Royal Engineers in 1915. On the Western Front of World War I, he received a serious wound, a shattered jaw. In later years this would lead to his Arab nickname of Abu Hunaik, meaning the one with the little jaw. He was then transferred to Iraq in 1920, which Britain had started governing under a League of Nations mandate following war, and was posted to Ramadi in 1922 to maintain a rickety floating bridge over the river, carried on boats made of reeds daubed with bitumen. As he later put it, he became an officer of the Arab Legion in 1930. The next year he formed the Desert Patrol, a force consisting exclusively of Bedouin, to curb the raiding problem that plagued the southern part of the country. Within a few years he had persuaded the Bedouin to abandon the habit of raiding neighboring tribes. In 1939 Glubb succeeded Frederick G. Peake as the commander of the Arab Legion. During this period, he transformed the Legion into the best-trained force in the Arab world. According to the Encyclopedia of the Orient, Glubb served his home country all through his years in the Middle East, making him immensely unpopular in the end. Arab nationalists believed that he had been the force behind pressure that made King Hussein I of Jordan join the Baghdad Pact. Glubb served different high positions in the Arab Legion, the Army of Transjordan. During World War II he led attacks on Arab leaders in Iraq, as well as the Vichy regime which was present in Lebanon and Syria. During the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the Arab Legion was considered the strongest Arab army involved in the war. Glubb led the Arab Legion across the River Jordan to occupy the West Bank. Despite some negotiation and understanding between the Jewish Agency and King Abdullah, severe fighting took place in Kfar region, Jerusalem and Litran. According to Avi Shlaim, rumors that Abdullah was once again in contact with the Jewish leaders further damaged his standing in the Arab world. His many critics suggested that he was prepared to compromise the Arab claim to the whole of Palestine as long as he could acquire part of Palestine for himself. The internecine struggles of the Arabs, reported Glubb, are more in the minds of Arab politicians than the struggle against the Jews. Azam Pasha, the Mufti, and the Syrian government would sooner see the Jews get the whole of Palestine than that King Abdullah should benefit. Glubb remained in charge of the defense of the West Bank following the armistice in March 1949. He retained the command of the Arab Legion until the 1st of March 1956, when King Hussein dismissed him. Hussein wanted to distance himself from the British and to disprove the contention of Arab nationalists that Glubb was the actual ruler of Jordan. Differences between Glubb and Hussein had been apparent since 1952, especially over defense arrangements, the promotion of Arab officers and the funding of the Arab Legion. Despite his decommission, which was forced upon him by public opinion, Glubb remained a close friend of the king. He spent the remainder of his life writing books and articles, mostly on the Middle East and on his experiences with the Arabs. Honors. Glubb was appointed OBE in 1925, CMG in 1946, and KCB in 1956. Family. In 1938, Glubb married Muriel Rosemary Forbes, the daughter of physician James Graham Forbes. The couple had a son, Godfrey, born in Jerusalem in 1939, and another son was born in May 1940 but lived only a few days. In 1944, they adopted Naomi, a Bedouin girl who was then 3 months old, and in 1948 they adopted 2 Palestinian refugee children called Atala, renamed John and Mary. Glubb's father was Major General Sir Frederick Manley Glubb of Lancashire, who had been chief engineer in the British Second Army during the First World War. His mother was Letitia Bagot from County Roscommon. He was a brother of the racing driver Gwenda Hawkes. Glubb died in 1986 at his home in Mayfield, East Sussex, and is buried in the graveyard at St Dunstan's Church in the village. King Hussein gave the eulogy at the service of thanksgiving for Glubb's life, held in Westminster Abbey on 17 April 1986. Lady E. Glubb died in September 2005 and is interred near her husband. The son, Godfrey, converted to Islam as a young man and took the name of Faris, becoming a prominent journalist and researcher into the Palestinian cause. He was killed in an accident in Kuwait in April 2004. His daughter Naomi died in 2010. Another son, John, is a solicitor. Reception. Glubb's autobiographical story A Soldier with the Arabs was reviewed in The Atlantic Monthly, April 1958, The National Review, May 1958, The Saturday Review, February 1958, The Reporter, April 1958, The New Yorker, October 1958, and Foreign Affairs, April 1958. Writing in The Reporter, Ray Allen commented that the book was more than just an apologia. While it provided no serious political analysis or social observation, it did offer interesting insights into the period, even if Glubb was out of touch with later trends in Middle Eastern politics. What Allen found more surprising was that Glubb also had hardly anything new to say about the 1948 Palestine War, in which he had star billing, instead lapsing into self-justifying propaganda. Allen ends his review with a long quotation from T.E. Lawrence, Indiana, which he reflects on what role a foreigner may play, and prays God that men will not, for love of the glamour of strangeness, go out to prostitute themselves and their talents in serving another race, but will let them take what action or reaction they please from silent example. Writing in the Saturday Review, Carl Herman Voss commented that Glubb served with and for the Arabs for 36 years, 17 of them for King Abdullah of Jordan. The portrait photograph is captioned, Glubb Pasha, I failed hopelessly. Voss calls the book well-written, absorbing, and often deeply moving, engrossing and informative, no matter how subjective, but also overly long. He enjoys the sensitive and lyrical writing that in places could be scanned as poetry, feeling the sudden fury of a border raid. Legacy. In his 1993 poetry collection, Out of Danger, James Fenton mentions Glubb Pasha in Here Come the Drum Majorettes. There's a gleb on a step in a dacha. There's a glob on a dig on the slack side. There's a glub in the sand. Writings. The source for the following bibliography is Contemporary Authors Online, Gale, 2005. Reproduced in Biography Resource Center, Farmington Hills. Mitch Thompson, Gale, 2005. Except asterisk. The Yazidis, Sulaba, and Other Tribes of Iraq and Adjacent Regions, G. Banter, 1943. The Story of the Arab Legion, Hodder and Amp, Stoughton, 1948. Da Capo Press, 1976. A Soldier with the Arabs, Hodder and Amp, Stoughton, 1957. Britain and the Arabs, A Study of 50 Years, 1908 to 1958. Hodder and Amp, Stoughton, 1959. War in the Desert, Anna. AF Frontier Campaign, Hodder and Amp, Stoughton, 1960. Norton, 1961. The Great Arab Conquests, Hodder and Stoughton, 1963, Prentice Hall, 1964. The Empire of the Arabs, Hodder and Stoughton, 1963, Prentice Hall, 1964. The Course of Empire, the Arabs and the Successes, Hodder and Stoughton, 1965, Prentice Hall, 1966. The Lost Centuries, For the Muslim Empires to the Renaissance of Europe, 1145 to 1453, Hodder and Stoughton, 1966, Prentice Hall, 1967. Syria, Lebanon and Jordan, Walker and Co. 1967. The Middle East Crisis, A Personal Interpretation, Hodder and Stoughton, 1967. A Short History of the Arab Peoples, Stein and Day, 1969. The Life and Times of Muhammad, Stein and Day, 1970. Peace in the Holy Land, An Historical Analysis of the Palestine Problem, Hodder and Stoughton, 1971. Soldiers of Fortune, The Story of the Mamluks, Stein and Day, 1973. The Way of Love, Lessons from a Long Life, Hodder and Stoughton, 1974. Harun al-Rashid and the Great Abbasids, Hodder and Stoughton, 1976. Into Battle of Soldiers, Diary of the Great War, Castle, 1977. The Fate of Empires and Search for Survival, Blackwood, 1978. Arabian Adventures, 10 Years of Joyful Service, Castle, 1978. The Changing Scenes of Life, An Autobiography, Quartet Books, 1983. Photos. Glubb Pasha on the right with King Abdullah in the middle. The Desert Patrol.